Welcome back to the CTO Playbook, the podcast dedicated to helping CTOs excel. If your AI transformation is stalling despite getting the technology right, the problem is probably a set of assumptions you inherited and never stopped to examine. Most CTOs approaching an AI initiative know what they want to build. They have a roadmap, a team, a budget. What they often don't have is a clear view of which assumptions are real constraints and which are just the sediment of how things have always been done. In 2026, that blind spot is expensive. Duri Chitayat is CTO at CINC Systems, a community association management platform where he leads a product development organization of close to 200 people across a globally distributed team. Today, he shares a 6-part playbook from questioning the assumptions you didn't know you had to measuring transformation in a way that actually tells you whether it's working. I'm your host, Adam Horner, CTO coach and founder of the CTO Playbook. Explore coaching, cohorts, and more resources at thectoplaybook.com. Now let's meet Duri and hear about his playbook and his fascinating background. Duri, welcome to the CTO Playbook. It's great to have you here.
Adam, thanks so much for having me.
And for those of you who are listening rather than watching, Duri is wearing a Star Wars t-shirt, which is massively important for me. I was actually born on Star Wars Day in the year that the film was released, so it's meaningful for me.
Wow, that's amazing. That is a nice badge.
Cool. So, Duri, for those people who are listening and haven't come across you before, it'd be really great if you could tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do for your work today.
Sure thing. So my name is Duri Chitayat. I'm based in Austin, Texas, originally a New Yorker. From a technology standpoint, I am the CTO of CINC Systems, which is a community association management platform. And really, my career is all about being a problem solver, people amplifier, and helping organizations make products that make life better for people.
Cool. So that's a little about community associations. I mean, what's a typical community association and what is the software that's needed to run one?
Right. So it's a little different in the UK. The US has a very formal structure. It depends a little bit by state, but essentially they're the people that help to make the communities that you live in a little less tedious, a little more meaningful. Things like cutting the grass, fixing the hedges, managing when you have a roof repair that needs to be done, all those sorts of things, but also when's the next barbecue in the neighborhood and what should we do about creating a new dog park?
Right. So scheduling and coordination for living in groups, communities, whether that's your village or the part of your town or even just the building that you are living in.
That's right.
Cool. Awesome. So you've got a very, very interesting background with engineering, and I'd love to just sort of scoot back to your earliest memories of engineering, because you started at a very young age, right?
Well, that's to be debated, but how much engineering I was doing at that point. But my family is very lucky to be surrounded by innovators and entrepreneurs. My dad is a New York Technology Hall of Fame Entrepreneur of the Year and holds more than 100 patents. And even his latest patent, he's 96 years old now, and his latest patent was just a couple months ago. And
that's more patents than the years he's been alive. That is impressive.
It is impressive. And what I got to witness from growing up around him was what it's like to look at a problem and not think, how do I make it a little bit better? But how do I completely transform it from first principles? He was a part of the Apollo missions. He helped to invent the stent that goes into the heart. He helped to invent, his most recent invention helps older people be able to stand upright. He's older and he understands that kind of pain point. He's just like, why can't I fix this? So by being around him, I got to appreciate very early on what it really means to be an engineer. And I've tried to live up to that in as small ways, in as many ways as I possibly can.
Wow. So that really is fundamental thing of breaking down a problem to its atomic parts, principles, and rethinking it from those levels up again. That's not something that many people get exposed to, I don't think.
Well, I definitely feel fortunate to have watched someone who's a master do that work. And I've tried to carry that forward into my work. And I think as a result, it gives me a unique perspective on some of the transformations that we've had over the last 20 years when I've been working.
Absolutely amazing. I mean, so tell us a little bit about some of the work that you've done following on from there then.
Right. So graduating college, one of my first jobs was to build an ERP system for a small robotics company.
Okay.
And was able to basically find where are all the thousands of parts that we purchased and now have lost? These things that are almost microscopic. And for my sins of being successful in that, somebody thought, hey, you built an ERP for a small company. How about rolling out SAP for a large company? And
because that's really similar, right?
and I learned very quickly the difference between writing code and delivering solutions. And
Right.
I ran that project. Some might say I ran that project into the ground for about a year, and then tried to base the rest of my career on my learnings from those two experiences.
Wow. So what did you learn in that transition? Because it does sound like quite a big jump.
Yeah, I think now we would call it socio-technical systems thinking, that basically that there's technology and then the people and processes that surround it. And that
Right.
you cannot introduce one without affecting the others. And if you don't design for both, you are in big trouble.
And so what did that mean practically in terms of, the teams you're working with, the people you're working for, and I guess the users who you were affecting with your work there?
Well, it taught me a great deal of humility early on, that my first draft is never my final draft, that what I think customers will do is never what they actually do. And that gave me an instinct to always question everything, but question my first assumptions. I believe my first assumptions tend to be suspect. And I tend to think about, hey, what am I seeing that's wrong? And that's actually the insight that you need to build something that's great. You could build a lot of decent things by operating on the heuristics of past paradigms. But if you can actually question those, find the right assumptions, and then flip it on its head, that's where you get real innovation.
Absolutely awesome. And so as we're going through that process, then, I mean, there's the first principles thinking, then there's the delivery part of it, then there's the people you're going to affect, there's the people you need to lead. And in all of that, there's sort of best practices, there's good practices, there's things that work well, and then there's the way that I guess everybody else tries to do it through habit, through pattern, through learned thinking.
Mhm.
How much of the time do you lean on the things that others have done? There's the things that I would naturally call a playbook, given the brand that I have, and those things where you're sort of thinking, hang on, I need to kind of, rethink this. I need to deconstruct this.
It depends a little bit on the situation. And there's a great book called Your Strategy Needs a Strategy. And I think BCG also has a framework that talks about this, which is like, if you're in a stable environment and like to a T, this is how the environment's going to be in a year, then you're in a Mount Fuji problem. Basically, your job is to run up the hill in the most efficient way as possible. And any brain space spent thinking about how to invent it differently, you're just running behind the race. You're actually losing the race. That is one kind of situation that, for instance, Hershey's Chocolate maybe is a company that does a good job of this. Like, they know down to a T how many chocolate beans they need per year, and they can plan that out well in advance and save a penny on every kilo, and they will make a lot more money. That's their mission. But in software engineering, and particularly today's world where there's a lot of transformation about, it's not like that.
No, it's more like running across a swamp or shifting sands or something these days, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly right. And so in that case, this is like this is what they call dancing landscape. Basically, you need to build the mountain goat of organizations that is capable of going fast, going up, going down, and also has good sensory ability to be able to know where the right direction is in the first place. And so the way that I try to approach these things is best practices is something, prior art is something that allows you to know where you are. And it allows you to also check verifiably that you are truly there on the map. The map tells you you're here, but are you really? You want to check that. And then you can decide, is here the right place for me to invest my innovation token? Every CTO only gets so many of those.
Yeah.
Pick your spots wisely so that you're running down the right alternative go trail.
Yeah. So I often talk about the map and knowing where you're on the map. And then I often talk about knowing which direction you're facing, which I guess is similar to what you're talking here about understanding which trail you need to take next. But this idea of this quota of the amount of effort, time, innovation, as you say, that you can spend is an interesting one, because there's a finite amount of sort of attention and energy that each of us has as leaders, as innovators, as engineers to make a difference. And so in terms of discerning which of the many goat paths there are around this place, or, just forging our own new path somewhere off, going off the beaten track, what do you use to help understand, okay, this is a good route versus this is a bad route? Because you spoke about instinct, but I often think about instinct as being sort of trained reaction based on history, rather than being something that is always reliable.
First step, in my view, is you have to know the problem yourself. If you are a leader and you're expected to actually offer people more than the goal of make more money, reduce costs, then you need to understand the crux of first the context of your problem.
Yeah.
Right. So design thinking is a good first principle, ethnographic research, being on the ground with actual customers, talking to them, being able to know their mannerisms, what makes them different than an ordinary person would expect. So that's probably step one. Step two is understand the tools, especially today. Like if the crux of the context shift is AI, which we're in 2026, so everything must start and end with AI. If you're someone who understands AI only through the lens of ChatGPT and Claude, you will not be able to be ahead of the curve, and therefore not be able to inform your teams of what's the real right answer here. So that's another thing, is to be in the work. And that's really only possible for people, CTOs, that have a team that is of a moderate size. If you are commanding 10,000 people, good luck.
It's difficult to be in the work at that scale.
Exactly right. But if you are at a reasonable size where you could actually go to the Gemba, see the actual ground truth of the work, touch the software, touch the actual customers, and see where the interaction is, then you will be able to make a better judgment, to have good taste about what problems really make the difference and what is just the fluff that follows after.
And so you made a very key distinction there, which is understanding the problem, the crux of the problem, as you said, which isn't necessarily the crux of the solution, because often you've got engineers who are going to iterate towards that. But understanding the problem is crucial to understand whether you're going in a direction that is valid or a direction that is less valid.
That's right. Yeah. The problem is more important than the solution in the end anyway. The ability to dive deep and understand that your customer that wants to hang the picture frame isn't really trying to hang the picture frame. They're not just trying to put a hole in a wall or cover up something. They're trying to make a statement about themselves. And usually it does resolve down into something emotional or physical that you could put a measure on. And figuring out what that is in your situation is the kernel of the context that you need in order to then design a solution that actually meets them where they are.
Got it. And so therefore, this is about understanding what the real intent is, what they're really trying to get to, rather than just what it looks like.
Yes, which they might not even know themselves. So if you were to ask them and they were to give you an answer, discount your first assumption, discount their first assumption. Whatever they say is maybe a piece of the truth, but rarely the whole truth. And it's the digging deep and understanding that leads to the strategy that ultimately leaders are responsible for. I think in the past, leaders were responsible for beating the drum and setting the goals. Today, leaders are much more responsible for strategy. And strategy is about what we just described. Context, the crux of the problem, a good diagnosis of what we need to do, and then having a few measurable outcomes or objectives that we can work towards, but it's really grounded in that previous understanding.
Got it. Because I think it's one of those things whereby if we jump to conclusions, if we make assumptions, or even if we allow the customer, the client, the user, the recipient to jump to conclusions as well, if we do both of those things, we often end up actually facing very much the wrong direction. I've seen that time and again.
Or missing an opportunity. And I think that's really what the 2026, 2025, 2027 is all about, is that we have a massive opportunity as engineers to think about the solutions that we have in place for many, many years in completely new ways. And the only way we can do that is we find the borders of the box that we're in. We don't even realize what box we're in. We have to find the borders first, and then we have to push beyond that to design the solution that's next. And users will naturally, they're within the box. They see the old saying, the Henry Ford thing that's a little bit boring at this point, but I'll repeat it anyway, is if you ask them what would they want want a faster horse. It's the same problem we have today.
Yeah. And it's interesting when you say drawing the borders, it's very similar. I use a slightly different expression, but similar to that, a little bit more graphical. So you remember that, I don't know, when you were a kid, if you had any of those sort of paint by numbers things you had to do, where you had, each little section on the picture has a number in it and you get the appropriate color in that bit. And often there's a lot of detail towards the center of the picture, and there's bigger and bigger swathes of color to go towards the outside of the picture. And I often think about problem solving. A lot of users and customers will jump to filling in the detail bits in the middle. Whereas I'd much rather sort of black out all the bits around the outside to understand the silhouette of what we're trying to go for first. So at least we know where we're not trying to solve, which I think is sometimes a quicker way to get to the point of, okay, we know the solution is somewhere in this space. It's definitely not in this space around it. Very similar to what you're saying about finding the borders first.
Exactly right. No, it is. And interestingly, I think they've done some research on child psychology that kids that are able to not just draw within the borders, but then start to do weird things outside of those borders are actually shown to be much more like it's a signal of intelligence. So I don't know, fascinating corollary.
Right, drawing outside the lines or not. And the other thing you mentioned there is that leadership now is about understanding those concepts, because one of the things I'm seeing here is that there is a sort of an argument that goes along with that as we all now running AI and fleets of agents and so on, that we're all managers. But I also see that often conflated with we're all leaders. And I think there is a distinction there which does need to be made between managers managing a set of agents versus your definition of leading there, which I thought was very clear in terms of setting the direction, understanding the context, but really understanding the problem very well.
That's right. No, it asks engineers to do more than code. If your job is just to instruct, then perhaps maybe that's more in the manager camp. Keep the thing moving, keep the tokens churning, apply best practices, use this model at this point in time, use this other model at this point in time. That's the paint by number stuff. And frankly, there will be an AI for that eventually. If you want to be a programmer, if you want to be an engineer, it's really about, understanding the real problem, spending more time on design and the why, so that the thing that you build is actually the best possible thing it can be.
And when we get to that point, often we're building what our solution solution is probably the best way of describing it, for the problem on top of what's come before it, the basics. How important to you is that sort of set of principles that you start building from, the foundation, if you like?
Principles are an element of strategy deployment. That if you go and do that design thinking research, you get into the mind of your customer, you think about why this is the crux of the strategy. The reality is not everybody else did that with you. And so you've got that kind of problem of like, how do you get people to be where you are? Right? Like, you know something, or you think you know something, but how do you get other people to see it such that they can go and take independent action and decisions with the right level of taste that you're looking for? That quality of the thing has to be just right. That's the difference between a great product and a good product, right? And so principles are fundamental strategy deployment mechanism where you could say, these are 8 things that I want in your mind, or 5 things that I want in your mind when you do a thing. And ideally, that's like everything they do. Well, you don't have like principles for 8 o'clock in the morning, another one for 9 o'clock in the morning. Well, you ideally want to have those principles to be across the work that they do, their experience in your team, in your organization.
Right. So they're long-lived, perennially true, quite literally foundational then. And so surely that is an area where, before we've got into the solutions, understanding those first. Is that what you mean by part of the way of getting everybody to be working at that sort of common level of quality, I guess?
I think so. I think my most recent, I joined CINC just 7 or so months ago.
Right.
And one of the first things that struck me was a saying that people would say around CINC. They would say, a little less tedious, a little more meaningful. And in that short statement that mantra that everybody would say, I picked up kind of like, what do we actually care about? And what is the problem we're trying to solve? And you can apply it in many different environments and cases where the alternative could look just as appealing, right? Comprehensive, something that is, I don't know, sophisticated might be a different principle, but that this principle supersedes and says, like, you could choose door number 1, door number 2, or door number 3, but this is the one we're actually choosing. And I think for me personally, it makes my job a lot easier to be aligned with my peer group and to make sure that my teams apply that same philosophy.
Awesome. And in terms of, because you just mentioned your peer group then, in terms of the organization then, your peer group is the leadership team for the company and so therefore, is there like a listed out set of principles like the one you just mentioned that the whole company runs by? Or is it more a case of in a particular area of the organization? So engineering has one set of those principles and other parts of the organization have different ones?
Yeah, the whole company does share a set of principles that I think reflect the kind of culture that we want to have. I would say perhaps what I wove in there was a bit more of the mantra, which to me is more of it's a bit more expressive. It shows up a lot more in our product design, but but in both cases, we share them across the entire organization. And we've tried to actually align our organizational structure to the application of those. So who people report to, how we do budgets, how do we do objective setting, everything there you could draw a direct line back to those mantras, those principles, and our annual objectives.
Cool. Okay. So clearly those predate you. So joining an organization is often one of those touchy areas for a CTO where you sort of, there's an opportunity for massive influence, but there's also the corresponding opportunity for being abrasive, not quite fitting into the organization as smoothly as you'd like to. Is that something that you have views on in terms of your experience and your work, in terms of picking up on things like this important fundamental mantra?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say one of the things that I do in my interviews, and one of the things I did when I was interviewing at CINC, is I tell people towards the end, when I think that this is somebody that really might be great for the team, that I'd want to offer a job, I always say, okay, let's pause and give me a chance to talk you out of a job. That you kind of have to say, here's where we're opinionated, and like, people might love it or they might hate it. So we're not chocolate or vanilla. We are cookie caramel swirl with nerds on top. Like, something some people will really love. And some people will just be like, get me out of here. I like something different. And so being really open and upfront about that opinionated view of the organization you want to build, the culture, the strategy, the structure, like whatever is most relevant to their role, allows people to self-select in or out. And definitely that's the right place to do it, is before they come into the organization. Because once they're in, like, you have a responsibility to make sure they're successful, no doubt. So it's much easier to do that if they're already locked in.
That's interesting. So literally trying to say, okay, let me try and put a hurdle in front of you. And if you pass the hurdle, I guess you're going to start off with a higher degree of trust, and B, a better fit as you come in the door in the first place.
Exactly right. And it goes a little bit back to the bias towards smaller organizations. For me, is because we're not looking for, give me 100 Java developers. It's, I want to have the best talent anywhere, period. And that best talent will fit exactly what I want, exactly how I want it. And I could do that because we're small, we're agile enough, and we're global.
Got it. I mean, there's already sort of a fine line you're trying to walk there between being small and being global, because being global, there's a lot of demands on being global these days. So, I mean, how big is the organization that you're working with in CINC?
400 people is the size of the organization. My team is about 170 or so at this point. And product development as a whole is probably around 180, 190. So we are, when I say global, it's a global product development team with primarily our business operations in North America.
Right.
But my team, we operate much more like an open source project. So when I say best talent anywhere, period, I really mean anywhere. So people that we've hired have been across Europe, India, North America, South America. They just need to be able to pass a very, very rigorous interview process and impress us with things that they've done in their past. We often say we do have juniors and mid-levels. Their names are Claude and Codex. Everybody else is senior and above.
Wow. Okay. So that's very selective in terms of what you're looking for. And in terms of, so this is very interesting because getting into the way that you use AI then. So very much, I presume that every engineer then is working with significant amounts of AI augmentation in the way that they work then. And as you do that then, I mean, how do you proceduralize the way that AI is used in such a way that you have your systems, you've got your AI, you've got your processes that go between them, you've got the engineers who are, I presume, orchestrating that. What's the sort of basic process for how the way that you look at that? Because I've seen multiple different models in larger organizations, and by large, I mean sort of over 50 engineers. Some of them more successful than others.
So the short answer to that is I like to let 1,000 flowers bloom in areas where best practice doesn't exist or is changing. And AI, the art of AI development is not yet stable, not in any way. And
Close.
so the things I prioritize is make sure like people understand the primitives. So that means like, don't buy the AI framework tool that abstracts away all the difficult stuff. Like, no, the difficult stuff is what you need to know to understand whether or not the system actually works. So buying a framework and then just saying people use this tool, you're inevitably what you're doing is you're locking your innovation into the speed at which this team could operate. This probably likely a startup is operating, and your teams are not going to be on the cutting edge. They're going to be laggards in many ways. So I really do prioritize making sure people understand the primitives. I also make sure that there's opportunity for cross-team collaboration because engineers are naturally curious. They're not interested, though, in repeating themselves. And so good engineers want ways in which, if it's a solved problem and it's not one that's most curious, most interesting to me, give me that. I'll use that. And so trying to find ways that there is this cross-team collaboration. We have an architecture guild where basically anything and everything gets raised. And in that way, we hope to attract people to the emerging good practice at CINC.
Got it. Okay. So, and I think emerging is the key word there. Is like, by the sounds of it, you're constantly evaluating, reevaluating as your teams learn, as stuff comes up from externally, and as other problems get solved, adopting those solutions, or at least testing those solutions out. And so in terms of, because there's this sort of trade-off between building things that you know work internally and working off those because you can trust them, you know your engineers have built them yourselves, versus delegating to others to be able to say, okay, we're going to adopt that because we've seen that works sufficiently effectively to go. So how do you sort of balance that trade-off between, hey, folks, trust no one but yourselves versus earned trust, and delivering autonomy to people who are trying to sort of figure out those solutions?
So this gets to one of the things that I try. The ways in which I talk people out of a job is by giving this explanation of how we work, because it's not easy. It's the hard work shifted left. So
right.
Because everybody is senior and above, you don't get your way because you said you want to do it. You only get your way is if you could convince people. And that goes for me too, because as you know, engineers are smart and have their own opinions. And if they see that I'm running roughshod over them, they will push back in ways both visible and invisible. And so my strategy is to apply a specific mechanism that allows everybody to feed in, feel that they've had a voice, align on a decision, and then lock it in. So we apply the RFC, the request for comments process, writing down context, problem, options considered, reasons why we choose one. Then this is the choice recommendation we've made. And what we've seen with this is like, look, only the people that care most about the problem or the solution are going to actually weigh in, but it allows everybody to feel like they've had an opportunity. In that way, like also everybody has a escape hatch. They can basically pull the hand crank or pull the lever to stop the train if they feel like whatever we're about to do is the wrong way.
Got it. Okay. So by giving the opportunity for everybody to contribute, those people, quite a few of them who probably legitimately have not an awful lot of interest, can just, okay, I'm not going to comment on this one, but it does give the opportunity for anybody to basically challenge anything, even that you bring forward, and say, no, I think we should do it this way. I mean, the RFC process, when I've seen it used with open source software, it can take a long time. Does that slow down your decision making? Does it mean that you sometimes have to every now and again short circuit the process a bit?
Yes, but these are only decisions that are cross team, right? So if it's a decision that you can make within your team, no RFC necessary,
Got it.
right? So those things that affect many people tend to be less common, and the things that you do want to go slower on anyway. Like it's ultimately, it is grit in the gear that allows us to make sure that we have a better outcome. You don't want to go fast on things that have a large blast radius and many people that have to get around it, because ultimately, if it requires lots of people to be on board with it, that change management buy-in is really critical anyway. You need them in order to ultimately deliver the outcome. They have to buy into it.
It sounds very similar to the Amazon one-way door, two-way door model of decision making. Is that sort of the same kind of flavor?
Yeah, definitely. It's not exactly, but it's similar in that. So the two-way door concept, for those who aren't familiar, it's basically like, if it's a decision that I could change my mind on later, it's a lot less risk. You don't need to put as much investment into it. You could try it out, do a POC and experiment. You could try it in a specific area. And if it doesn't work, no big deal.
Just change it.
Try something else.
Yeah.
That's very different than like, we're signing a 2-year contract with this vendor to do this thing. It's going to cost us $1 bajillion. Like that's a one-way door that your CFO is not going to be very happy if like a week into the project, you say, actually, we decided to go with something else instead. It's like, wait, hold on. We have all this money that we've invested in this, all this time or whatever it is. So that definitely should elevate it to an RFC if it is a one-way door.
Got it. Makes a lot of sense. Jerry, we've gone through quite a few things, and I think we've probably covered most of the fundamentals on the playbook set that you've got. Do you want to just talk us through the playbook? And what I'll do is I'll introduce each one of them as I remember it, and then hopefully you can give us a little bit more flavor on each one. So at the beginning, we started talking about the assumptions that we have, especially the assumptions that are inherited from elsewhere. So questioning the inherited assumptions.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the most memorable statement I can make on this is something my dad said to me a few years ago when I was asking him, because he had invented in many different spaces, medical, aerospace, robotics. When I asked him how he did that, he leaned in and told me, most people don't try. And so I think that's like a core thing that every culture, every good engineering culture needs to build in, is that instinct to go, are we sure we know why we're doing what we're doing? Are we sure that the limitations that we're placing on this solution are real and not a figment of our imagination or of a previous paradigm? Is there something that we could do to unset or question those assumptions to find some deeper opportunity?
Yeah, I love that. Most people don't try. Such a simple thing to live by. Number 2 on your list, we had the way that we designed. So going from, rather than from the interface, from the UI, starting from the intent, what it is that we need to do.
That's right. And it's a corollary to the previous one about questioning assumptions, is that oftentimes we design from the things that we can see. If we were mechanical engineers, we'd have physical objects, drawings, models that we would build. But in the digital world, we tend to have these interfaces that we're accustomed to, whether they be APIs or digital or mobile interfaces. In the world we're moving to, the paradigm shift is that these interfaces actually are a remnant, a metaphor from the digital age, the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And so we need to teach ourselves to go, what is the purpose behind this that I'm trying to do? Design from that intent of the user. And in that way, you could start to converge or diverge towards alternatives beyond the thing that you would have automatically picked 5 years ago.
Yeah, I think that's very, very relevant. There's so many organizations I know who are trying to pivot their product so that it can now not only be used on the web, on mobile, but now with voice first, MCP first, API only. And so I think the number of ways in which we use things is extending massively. So I think this as a principle is brilliant. and so foundational. And talking of foundations, number 3 on the list you had was strengthen the foundation first.
Right. So a lot of people's instincts when they want to invest is to invest in the cherry on top. But I think what we've learned over the last 2-3 years from people applying AI in earnest and CFOs going, 95% of CFOs are going, I'm not making money with this. This is not actually mattering. Is that we're realizing that AI is a interpretation engine. It is able to do things that certainly declarative software never could do before. But if you don't at least have your foundations, data, security, contracts between systems, a concept of your overall product architecture landscape, then adding AI to that will only accelerate some sort of fissures, cracks, seams that your customers will feel, and they'll kind of go, this is just wrong. It doesn't work. I don't like it. And then you'll have a difficult time making money that way.
Yeah. As one of the CTOs I work with said, it'll either accelerate the greatness or it'll accelerate the bottlenecks, but it'll definitely accelerate everything.
Indeed.
Brilliant. And so talking about AI, separating the AI interpretation from the system truth was number 4 on your list. Tell me a little bit more about that one.
Right. So there are certain things in software or the world in general that are either right or they're wrong. How much money I have in a bank account is not an interpretation. It is just a matter of dollars and cents, and it has a decimal somewhere, right? If the bank gets that wrong, I'd be very annoyed. So you need to understand that those sorts of systems are different than the interpretation systems that we put on top, and being very deliberate and design with different substance for the different problems. One of the challenges I've seen in my own work in this area is like, my instinct about this wasn't always right at the beginning. My instinct was to kind of like get to the solution, right? As an engineer, it's like, I want to be able to build an invoicing system. And so, or I want to be able to build some sort of consulting system. And like, I would mash up both things that are facts with things that are interpretations. And as a result, I got to a system that maybe looked right, but when people spent enough time with it, they lost trust in it because I wasn't designing with the concepts separate from one another. So I think that that's a really important design principle. And as we invest more in AI, we need to be able to get the foundations right first.
Got it. So get the absolute facts, the system truth distinct from the way that any interpretive layer above it works, whether that's AI, whether that's humans, whether that's third-party systems, so that we have the core fact-driven parts of the platform totally separate.
That's right.
And talking of which, that then comes on to number 5. It's a very nice segue from there, which is build trust, because I think that sort of comes from getting the facts correct, doesn't it?
Yeah, and this is another one. It goes back to my early days, and I could build a piece of software that technically does the job, but the people will have a say in whether or not they think that it's actually working right. And people are still learning how these systems work. They're like, it's kind of, I feel like it's the beginning of the e-commerce revolution in some ways, where you had to have that green lock icon on every checkout screen. You had to have things laid out in a particular way so that people started to say, okay, this is one that I like. I like this one because it makes me feel safe. And we're still learning what the metaphors are that we need to introduce to our users so that they come on the journey with us, right? It's not enough to be right. They have to also trust it. And so that's going back to the point about truth versus interpretation. When we design in a way where we know the difference of the substance we're working with, and then we design the journeys to bring people with us on that so that they use it and get the benefit, we'll build better solutions.
I like that because there's been several people who've spoken to me recently bring in what seems to be on the surface a completely wrong analogy, but bear with me for a second, which is the process of grief, which starts off from denial and ends in acceptance, along to this idea of system change management, because it kind of starts off in the same way where we have people sort of resisting at the beginning, as you say, there is no green check mark, so I don't trust it yet. And so you get to that point of acceptance of, oh, this is familiar to me now. I'm quite happy to go and put my credit card in on Amazon or any other retailer because I know that the goods will arrive at my door. I've seen it enough times now. So yes, build trust. I think it's a critically important thing. And I think a lot of organizations have a lot to learn yet about what that means in the AI era, because the rules of the road are still being written.
Absolutely. The rules of the road are still being written. There's a new news story every other week about some security flaw or customers that were built out of something, or like people are not yet fully on board with what AI offers. And so if you're an organization that designs without the understanding of how your customers feel, how they're going to approach a problem, like what their biases will be walking in, you could build a completely reasonable product that does a great job and that nobody uses.
Absolutely. And then the last stage of your 6 points goes straight on from there, which is understanding that process of where we are, measuring the transformation. What do you mean by measuring transformation? What does good measurement look like versus a measurement that is a vanity measurement? Because it's one of these things that I think as product people versus engineers, it ends up being one of those tussles that happens all the time.
Oh, yeah. I think that what I mean by measure the outcome is, or measure the transformation is, you need to know where you're going. And you need to make it in such a way where it's falsifiable, so that what you can't do is just spend money, learn something, spend more money, learn something, and then 2 years later look around and go like, did I get any ROI from that? Did our customers get any benefit from that? Like, I spent a bunch of money, check, I learned a bunch of things, but I didn't actually achieve what my customers wanted. I didn't achieve what my business wanted. And so giving yourself a scoreboard, I think, is another part of that strategy deployment I was mentioning early. It's like, you have to have the idea of where you're going. You have to know why, the crux of the problem you're trying to solve. And you need to know the measures that allow you to see, is it working? Because if it's not working, you only get so many innovation tokens. If you keep spending them all on the wrong idea, you'll run out of runway. So learning early from what you're doing and verifying that you are on the right path, that really helps hold yourself accountable and allows you to also give the teams a lot of confidence that they're going in the right direction too. Because that's also really important here, which is that people don't like change, whether it's your customers or your team members or your partners. They're all going to look at change without the rose-colored glasses that you have, because you have the drug of belief. You believe that what your strategy is going to have a great, a pot of gold at the other end of the rainbow. You need some measurement to keep them on the road with you while things are hard, while things look tough, because you could show, look, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening. It's ticking up. It's not all the way where we want to get to yet, but we're seeing we're on the right path. And that hopefully holds people with you in the difficult journey of that transformation.
And unfortunately, this is one of these ones that's really, really hard, because we can say, measure transformation and measure it well, but history is littered with completely false and actually misleading measures. I mean, we had the number of lines of code which IBM introduced as a measure that they went by in, I think it was at the 60s, which has since been, people laugh at it now. Like it's one of those tropes that's a running joke. In the 80s and 90s, we had the number of engineers employed by an organization as a proxy for quality. We've recently got exactly the same things happening again with the number of tokens burned. Okay. Look, yeah, and I use the word burned there quite deliberately, because it isn't a measure of quality, and yet we keep making the same mistake. So picking a way of measuring that we're having an impact is seriously a hard problem to solve.
It is, and it's hard to make without being in the context of your specific problem. I think that's one of the keys here, is that, like, I still apply Dora metrics because I like to know that I've got an engine that can rev. But if I only exclusively looked at Dora metrics, I'd be going really fast in the wrong direction. It's the customer metrics that ultimately, or something related back directly to your strategy, that will help keep you grounded in, is the approach that I'm specifically taking to the specific problem yielding the specific results that I want? And, people will naturally game it. So you have to watch, you have to very carefully watch how it's being applied. Look for those telltale signs that it's being balanced by something else. But it's the best thing that you could do is to keep your eye on that ball. That will tell you, that'll keep people on the road with you as you, the journey with you as you go through the rough patches.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. The measures are good, but it is also worth looking out the window every now and again. I always say, if you look at the dashboard on a car, it's fantastic. You can read a lot of stuff off the modern car dashboard, but you still need to look out the window.
That's true. That is true. You'd be wise to look out the window when you're driving anything but auto driving car.
Absolutely. So we had number 1, question inherited assumptions. We had number 2, design from intent, not from interface. We had number 3, strengthen the foundation first. We had number 4, separate the AI interpretation, or indeed anybody's interpretation, from the system truth. We had number 5, build trust and introduce autonomy gradually. And then number 6, of course, measure transformation. It's been a fairly complete and thorough review of that approach. If you were to give one piece of advice, though, Duri, to a CTO who's relatively recently come into the profession, they've got this playbook in front of them, this set of principles that you have here, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give them to tie it all together to make it work?
Most important thing goes back to what we started with, which is the leadership paradox. The leadership paradox is you need to be able to operate at 10,000 feet, but you have to be able to get context from the ground truth. And being able to operate at both levels is very difficult, but that is the biggest unlock for everything.
Absolutely amazing. What a wonderful note on which to summarize the whole thing. Duri, if people want to continue the conversation, how can they get hold of you?
People can connect with me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way.
Excellent. We can put a link to that in the show notes. Duri, thank you very much for your time, and I hope you have a great day continuing on.
Wonderful speaking with you, Adam. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the whole episode. I appreciate your time. So just before you go, I'd like to ask you for a favor in return for putting together this episode of the CTO Playbook for you. Please share the episode with just one person who will appreciate it. Wherever you're listening, whether that is Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or another platform, sharing the episode will help more CTOs find the podcast and enable me to create more great content. Remember that you can find more information on the CTOplaybook.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of the CTO Playbook.